José Roberto Ferro. He's going to be the next host with the session that we are going to go through with Womack. We will have Dan Jones information, and we have Jim Morgan also. So first I will call on stage Ferro, the founder of the Lean Institute here in Brazil, and he's joining me here in São Paulo. Okay, so I will pass this event to him at this moment. For the next hour, he will be here on the main stage. Thank you, Ferro.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night to everybody. It's a great honor to be part of this event. It's a fantastic event, looking at the number of people, looking at how complicated it is to organize this type of event. I'm from the old generation. Things used to be done in person. And now all these challenges of this connection, but it's fantastic. At this point, we can talk, we can meet people from all over and share our experience and share our learnings. So I'm extremely honored and pleased to be here in this kickoff session. And I have the honor to introduce our three first speakers. The session is the machine that is changing the world again. And it refers to a very influential book that was written by two of the presenters here, Dan Jones and Jim Womack. They were the co-authors of this book. And along with Jim Morgan, they will introduce us to this new world of mobility that we are going to be talking about in this next session. They all have done major contributions to the Lean movement. Jim Womack and Dan Jones have cooperated in many breakthrough books since the original automobile studies and up to more recently Lean Thinking and Lean Solutions. Those contributions have inspired us to help companies, organizations all over the world, and it has inspired the creation of the Lean Global Network. And the third speaker will be Jim Morgan, who has made a great contribution in shaping the Lean product and process development ideas and practices. This framework has been built with some of the major contributions that Jim has done in some of his most relevant books, the Toyota Product Development System, and more recently, Designing the Future. Jim Morgan also had a very successful professional career, both at Ford and the new startup, the electric truck company Rivian. This will help Jim drive us through the future of mobility and the future of the innovation in this industry. So we're going to start with a video from Dan Jones, the founder of the Lean Enterprise Academy in the UK, who will talk about the origins of Lean. And he's going to be doing that in a video. He cannot be present live with us, but he made a special video for this event. Please, would like to share Dan Jones' video.
We first encountered Lean when we were carrying out the first MIT study called The Future of the Automobile between 1980 and 84. And it was a unique collaboration, not only with researchers around the world, but also a key representative from all of the car companies around the world and most of the governments that were involved. And during that program, it became clear that the Japanese were being very successful and competing in the American and the European markets, so much so that the governments erected voluntary export restraints against Japanese imports. And our sponsors were in full discussion about this. And we were, on the other hand, questioning the logic of whether this was simply because there were some artificial benefits that the Japanese had that other people didn't have. We were convinced there was something more to to this. And we had been walking around car factories for years, but when we finally got to Japan in 1982, to the first summit that we had in Japan, and we were able to visit those companies, many companies, car companies, it became very clear to Jim and I that this was something fundamentally different, and fundamentally a fundamentally different management system. So that gave us the conviction that actually measuring the gap that we were seeing in landed cost advantage was worth doing and extremely important. And our sponsors thought so too. We had some very, very senior representatives who played a very important role later on as chairman of General Motors and the negotiators for the NUMMI plant and so on. They were all part of the sponsors that encouraged us to actually take part to develop the second program, the IMVP program, between 1985 and 1990. And that basically allowed us to build a step-by-step, to build a very detailed benchmarking methodology that had never been done before, to benchmark production, to benchmark product development, to benchmark supply chain, and to analyze dealers' operations. So the benchmarking was one thing. The other thing was that we had lots of examples that were beginning to appear, not just in Japan. We had examples from, well, obviously NUMMI and Rover and Honda and many others, Mitsubishi in Japan, in Australia, many others examples. So we were actually in a network of people seeing the same things that we were seeing and actually collaborating to try and understand them. So the methodology allowed us to inform, to gather the stories from these other researchers and industrial executives. And we also went back and did a detailed, very detailed study of Ford's original operations at Highland Park and River Rouge and compared that with Toyota's operations, which gave us a real in-depth study of the detail of the system. And as we wrote this up, we were quite convinced, Jim and I were quite convinced, that this was actually a business system whose logic was that you build regional complexes in each country rather than build low-cost labor sourcing. So that led to the machine book. The reaction was astonishing. We were invited to talk all over the world and gather stories and see examples and gradually pull together the material that we then started discussing at the summits and then also wrote up in Lean Thinking. And that led to the formation of LEI and later on LGN. So it was a long process of gradually uncovering what was going on and gradually making sense of it and understanding it, and then sharing the message. And the response was very, very enthusiastic and led us to continue. So it was a unique opportunity. We were in the right place at the right time.
Thank you, Dan, for not only for preparing this video, this message, especially for this event, for this global connection, but also for your contribution over the years. Without your contribution, both intellectual and also helping to set up the Lean network, the Lean Global Network, it has been fundamental, and we are very thankful for your contribution. Now, I would like to invite the other co-author of this book, of those books, of this contribution. Jim Womack was the research coordinator of the MIT studies and also co-author with Dan Lean Thinking and Lean Solutions. Together, they made the contribution to create the Lean Global Network, as I mentioned to you. Please, Jim. In Boston.
Okay, here we go. Someone's going to pull some slides up there, I think. They're really just, there we are. Just talking points on what I'm doing, since not everybody, excuse me, speaks English as a first language. It seemed like it would be good to have some talking points, but that's all they are. It's always great to join Dan on one of these events. We've been promoting what has become lean thinking since the first conference that we organized in Philadelphia in the June of 1981. So that was our first global connection. We had leaders of car companies and first-tier suppliers from all over the world, and our research team from all over the world, all in one room. I think all guys, I think probably without exception, they were all men. And that was the beginning of what we've now been at for more than 40 years. Just a couple of thoughts for our younger members of our group. I think this is a time where there's going to be a lot of rethinking, a lot of disruption going on in the world. We can feel it. And so please take advantage of your lack of experience. Take advantage of your beginner's eyes. That we were able to pretty early on in our careers learn that we needed to go to the Gemba to observe the work, the flow, the waste, and the struggles of the value creators. And it was really helpful that we didn't know what we were actually looking at. We started in the car industry because that's where Toyota was. If Toyota had been in the spaghetti industry or the hotel industry or whatever, I suppose we would have gone there. We were not car guys as such. That we were basically an industrial economist, that was Dan, and a political scientist, that was me. We didn't know anything, and that was enormously useful. Didn't know anything about production, about product and process development, about supplier support, about enterprise management, about general management. And that made it possible for us to see some things. We went to a General Motors plant and noted that 100% of the cars coming off the assembly line, which ran 100% of the time, went to the rework building. We could ask a simple question, why? Which the people running the plant thought that was normal. They had been doing it that way for 60 years. So that is the power of the beginner. Let's see, I'm told here through the chat that not all the slide is actually showing up on the screen. And that's fine by me because I've got my crib sheet here, but I can see from my screen, you can't see the bottom bullet. Okay, so let's keep going. But here's one thing that we were able to make simple, that as we started, we simply accepted the car industry's definition of value. What the customer wanted was a car. Very simple. Didn't have to ask about that. It was an industry with stable technology, stable product architecture, quite mature, commoditized. It was always a problem when we said that, but it really was commoditized. And so therefore the issue of customer choice was not on the basis of some great big features of the vehicles, but instead on quality, delivered defects, on reliability, on refinement at a price point. And that was great for TPS and for lean product and process development. You didn't have to think about value. That if you remember the original TPS house, it was cost, quality, delivery up in the top, in the pediment. And by the way, that house was developed for Toyota suppliers at the end of the 1960s so that they could understand how they fit in the picture. So if you're a supplier, you don't think about designing the part. That's already been approved by Toyota. You think about quality, delivery, cost. So that was very simple. Made life easy. But there was, a consequence, and that is our community, I think, has always been a lot better at thinking about deployment from a stable definition of value than rethinking value. As I say, tell me how to define value and I'll get you the product. But what happens when the definition of value dramatically changes? And I think it's possible that that's where we are now. Indeed, maybe we are switching as the fundamental unit of consumption from a car to mobility, often said to be mobility as a service. There are 4 technologies that are deeply relevant here. Connectivity, and that is all the data flowing into and out of the car and between the cars. autonomy, we know. Sharing, which is multiple users using vehicles rather than single owners as the only users of vehicles, and of course, electrification. And we see a progressive disruption of the car industry. As Akio Toyoda frequently says, it's the once in a century disruption. Everything is disrupted. And at the same time that the greenhouse issue has become a serious one. A lot of talk about it for a long time, but now in the car industry, it is deeply serious. And this makes it both possible to focus broadly on mobility as a service rather than on a car or a car company. That sounds so simple, but it's deeply upsetting and discombobulating to people. When we have these established ways of thinking, it's very hard to think in a different way. So, what do we do when the customer wants a provider to solve their mobility problem rather than to sell them a product or a service, insurance, maintenance, financing in the case of cars? And the customers want their personal mobility problem solved as well. Personal mobility, well, that's what Amazon does for you. They bring the stuff to you. That's what all kinds of delivery services, Grubhub and everybody else. And there's this merging of logistics and mobility. Logistics is normally about stuff. Mobility is about people. In this coming age, they are merged. Same vehicle, possibly with both passengers and cargo in the vehicle at the same time, going on complex routings and so forth. So how can we respond? How do we map solution streams rather than just product family value streams? We're very good at that, the product family value stream. And how do we include externalities like carbon dioxide, along with other waste in our mapping, by the way, including the waste of the customer's time? Now, Dan and I took a first whack at these challenges in our Lean Solutions book back in 2005. Most creative thing we ever did. Absolutely most creative thing we ever did. And nobody read it. It was just before its time. That we were doing a strategy book for operations people and an operations book for strategy people. And those were two unicorns that just didn't exist. And so there was no one to listen. You know, when no one is to listen, no one will hear. Well, of course, we're now old. And I just say that as a simple matter of fact. But our younger members of the community are really going to need to think about this because things are actually happening. Some things that I think are apparent right now, that startup organizations, and there are lots and lots out there, and that's not just making cars, but in all of the data areas and control areas, they really badly need lean product and process development to create robust solutions for new value propositions with minimum CapEx lead time and product failures. It is exasperating to look at, for example, the startups in the car space that my advice always is go slow to go fast. And the whole ethos of the time is go fast, and it turns out to go slow. It is an amazing thing. We know already what happens when you try to go fast, when you don't have clear definition before you start, when you don't have robust processes. And so we still have a message for startups if we can somehow or other get them to listen. I'm hoping that the new Toyota BZ series, that's Beyond Zero is the BZ, their new electric vehicles, their first since the RAV4E in 2014 that they did jointly with Tesla. I hope these new Toyotas due out next year will be the first example of going slow to go fast. Toyota is behind in the game, but they've been taking their time. They're trying to get it right. But even Toyota is struggling with the question, what is a car company? The world just ahead. Had a number of conversations with senior Toyota people and say, what is your problem? Always we want to start with the problem. And the problem is, what is a car company? That companies desperately want to be relevant. Sorry about that. And they want to be the closest to the customer. That is really the big problem here for any car company. They worry about being disconnected from the customer because what's a tier 1? What's a tier 0.5? What's an OEM? Nobody actually knows. It's pretty interesting. Another thing that's clear is that mature organizations, and there are a lot of mature organizations out there facing disruption, a lot of organizations facing disruption. I've recently been talking with an office furniture company. The question is, what if there's no office? What if the office is a 20th century idea, not a 21st century idea? What becomes of an office furniture company? Well, that's pretty interesting. There's a fundamental question of what's the value and what they try to do. And what we can say to those people is, well, they're going to have to try experiments. And to try those experiments, they really need resources. And that is a great enabler that lean thinking provides, is to free up the resources that disrupted organizations need in order to try experiments to discover the new value proposition that will take them ahead. Toyota is a great example. They are pursuing concurrent engineering on a grand scale, working on both goods and services needed to provide mobility in this time of disruption. Electric vehicles, including those with solid-state batteries, fuel cell electric vehicles, plug-in hybrid vehicles, hydrogen-powered conventional drivetrains. Just saw a picture of Akio Toyoda out driving his hydrogen-powered gas-engined race car. Asset sharing, in which more than one party can use the same vehicle, some at the same time, but also in a serial fashion. A Guardian, which has Toyota speak for autonomy. They don't think we're anywhere close to level 5 autonomy, but you could get to 2.5, where the vehicle keeps the driver from killing himself or herself, no matter how foolish their behavior. And of course, the connectivity to bring all these pieces together. And to do that, they need cash. And where Toyota is getting the cash is from the continuous, relentless reduction of waste in the existing production activities. We were recently, probably many of you on this connected event were in Kyushu 3 years ago, when we were looking at what Toyota was doing at the Lexus mother plant to take out more waste out of what was already, I think, without question, the world's best production operation. And they were working very hard to reduce the labor content further, to reduce CapEx by having smart automation that didn't cost much money as opposed to smarter automation that cost crazy money. All of designed to free up resources to try the experiments that they need to do. So there's plenty for lean thinkers to do. We're not obsolete. Here's the good news. As long as the world is full of waste, the world is full of waste. As long as there is a need to provide more value for customers while minimizing the waste and to deal with externalities. People always ask me, is lean green? And I say lean is neutral. That what lean does, if you do it right, is to free up the resources to, for example, develop electric cars to deal with carbon dioxide. So we're still useful. By the way, we've still got the world's best product and process development system. We've got the world's best production fulfillment system. We know how to do the world's best supplier management and improvement system. We know how to support customers in a better way. We have the world's best management system. That's daily management for stability. That is improvement management with A3, PDCA, Kaizen, to lift the standard, make things better. And of course, Hoshin, which begins with saying, what's the value that we are trying to create? We have the best methods in all of those areas. We just need to make sure that we're applying them to the right value proposition. Now, finally, if you want to think a little bit further about mobility, this turn of the crank to get to something that might be connected, automated, shared, electrified, is not necessarily the last turn. We right now, right here, are asking a question. Do humans want to move their molecules around? If we had done this conference 2 years ago, we would have all moved our molecular cells using a lot of jet fuel, creating a lot of carbon dioxide, a lot of jet lag. Had a lot of fun though, to get together in one room, in one place to talk. And now we are moving electrons around our sort of virtual selves, our avatars, to access things of interest. Okay, so what do people want to do? going forward. That really is a question about mobility. Maybe we don't need mobility. What we need is virtual access. And who knows? But we have to figure out what that value proposition is in order to use the wonderful tools that we have for product and process development, for fulfillment, for supplier management, for customer support, for general management, so that we can continue to be relevant. So perhaps I'll see you henceforth in the metaverse. You never know. Mark Zuckerberg is waiting for us, apparently. Don't have to go anywhere. Just electrify and digitize yourself, and off we go. Going to be a lot of fun, very hard work, and in particular for us who were so good at thinking about the previous world of objects. And now we have to think about a more complicated world, in this case, cars versus mobility. Thank you.
For your presentation, and also we have to thank you for your intellectual contribution over the years with some of the most relevant books that inspired us, and also by creating Lean Enterprise Institute. That was extremely important when Jim created LEI. I thought that was a great idea, so I created the Lean Institute here in Brazil, and gladly many other countries followed. So thank you very much for all your contribution over the years. Now is the time to introduce our third speaker, Jim Morgan. I think by the time Dan and Jim Womack were doing all their research, Jim Morgan, after finishing his studies, after finishing a very influential book about the Toyota product development system, Jim Morgan was actually working in a company, was Ford. So he helped to make a huge transformation at Ford, starting from product development. I have had the opportunity to work directly with Jim Morgan through some partnerships with the company, and it has been extremely important experience for me. Learning about LPPD, now it's a very fundamental practice and the concept that we should all spread to all the companies. This is going to be extremely helpful as we move forward in our journey. So I'd like to ask Jim Morgan to present his thinking about the future, the innovation, and the future of mobility. Please, Jim Morgan.
Thanks, Jose. And it's also been great to work with you as well, and just very honored to be part of the first Lean Global Connection, and very humbled to be part of this particular session with people like Jim Womack and Dan Jones. And as usual, Jim had a number of great insights in his presentation that I hope we have a few minutes to talk about, towards the end of this session. So I'm going to talk a little bit about LPBD as a framework for innovation and disruption. We often associate disruption with technological breakthroughs, right? We associate technology with as a disruptor. And there have been some incredible technological developments in my time in the auto industry. I've been around a long time. When I started, we were still working on drafting boards. And so we've moved to solid modeling. We've moved to some incredibly sophisticated simulation softwares, 3D printing, have all made a huge impact on product development. But technology by itself is inert. What's really powerful are ideas. And without a doubt, the most disruptive ideas that happened during my time in the auto industry was Lean, both in manufacturing, in supply chain, in management system, and of course in product development. These ideas changed the entire industry. And I would also say changed many other industries as well. Everybody knows sort of the data, half the time in development, 2/3 of the cost, highest profit per vehicle, highest quality. Sales kind of go back and forth, but incredibly high sales. And one of the things that occurs to me is that this community, this group that's getting together today, are the result of disruptive ideas, right? It's in our DNA. It's part of who we are as lean practitioners. Sometimes we have to dig a little deep to get below the standard work, but innovation is a fundamental part of the continuous improvement and the waste elimination that Jim talked about. And so we are the product of a major disruption that started in the auto industry. Of course, there's another round of disruption going on now. Jim mentioned that in his talk, and it's profound. It's an incredible time to be in the auto industry. It's both new technologies and new ideas. The EV technology is, of course, incredible. Both the powertrain technology as well as the software is just amazing. But it's accompanied by a number of very powerful ideas that have yet to be fully manifested. Starting with an EV can be your primary vehicle, right? In fact, it can be better than your internal combustion vehicle. GM was making electric vehicles for a long time when guys like J.B. Straubel and Martin Eberhard came along and said, this can be actually better than what you're driving today. And it can be much better for the environment as well. Then there were ideas like dealerships, right? Do we really need dealerships? Is it a good idea to have an independent entity between us and our customer? Or should we build a direct relationship with that customer? Should we build a long-lasting relationship with that customer? And then questions that Jim brought up as well. Do we need a driver, right? Do we need to drive? Do we even need to own our own cars, right? Long way to go in this space, but I think it challenges a lot of our assumptions, and challenging assumptions are the most powerful disruptive ideas. Software first development, thinking about software as what really defines the value that you're creating for your customer. And so we sort of build this vehicle around the software, which I have to say is a little bit tough to take for an old body guy. And then perhaps the most potentially disruptive idea of all, and that's continually improving the product after the sale, right? Getting data on the use case for that product and making customized updates to the performance of that product to continue to increase the value proposition for that particular customer and building a long-term relationship. This is fundamentally different than the old automotive model that says, let's, push metal, let's sell vehicles, and then run a lot of commercials and hope that they come back later on. This is a really different way to approach how we think about creating value for customers in the auto industry. My personal experience about a year ago was as the chief operating officer for a company called Rivian. Rivian is one of these EV startups. In fact, a incredibly successful EV startup so far. They IPO'd recently. They focus on building sustainable trucks and delivery vans with the idea of enabling people to explore our world in the most sustainable way possible. In fact, it was founded by a former student of Jim Womack and John Shook's, RJ Scaringe. I call it a startup. It's been evolving for, I think, about 9 years now. And it was a really unique experience for me joining Rivian for about the 14 months or so that I was there. The products are really an expression of the mission. It's why the company is coming together. They have both B2B products, that is the electric delivery vans that they make for Amazon and very soon for other people, as well as traditional B2C, business to customer products that they create. And that's their R1T and R1S pickup truck and an SUV. And they focus on really defining the art of the possible. In other words, we don't want to make a product unless it's substantially better than what's available now, right? That's sort of the disruptive element that's in their DNA, returning to first principles and really expanding the envelope, as I say, redefining the art of the possible. And so far, they're off to a good start. Initial reviews, here's a quote from Motor Trend. The R1T is the most remarkable pickup we've ever driven. So they're well on their way to creating a disruptive product, but they're very early in the climb. RJ and I would talk about that a lot. They're just sort of in the foothills. They still have to scale up. There's still a lot of challenges in front of them. So it remains to be seen how successful they are. But I think they're an excellent model of this focus on disruption and building it around value creation all along that value stream, right? All the way from the product itself, how it's manufactured, how it's delivered, that last mile, and then what the end of life process is. One sort of word of advice is, if you aim to disrupt a major industry, you definitely need a high tolerance for risk because it's an incredible environment. And just a quick aside, this is what the plant in Illinois looked like when I got there. It was definitely a clean sheet. And I know many of us who have worked to change organizations have often thought, if I only had a clean sheet, right? If I only didn't have to undo, all these years of processes. My advice to you is be careful what you wish for. It's crazy. There's endless things to do. They're all a number one priority. There's not a lack of ways to do things. There's actually 100 different ways to do things. Because the people that come into the organization come from someplace else. They come from Toyota or Apple or Tesla or Ford, and they bring those things with them. And so sorting that out and really evolving into the Rivian way of doing things was a huge challenge. And of course, it's a constantly growing and evolving team. I think during the time that I was there, we went from, 300 or 400 people to 3,000 people, I think, in that short period of time. But it does create a fabulous platform for LPPD because, of course, LPPD, Lean Product and Process Development, is about creating new value, right? It's about innovating. It's about disrupting. And in fact, it's about creating entirely new value streams, thinking through every step in the delivery of value to your customer. And it offers you this unique opportunity to innovate all along the value stream and to connect that, right? Connect that during the design period is incredibly powerful. And you are, I've said it many times, essentially designing the future, certainly your future, because the decisions that you make during development are going to impact your future for many years to come. There's the sort of LPPD guiding principles that have evolved over, 25 or 30 years of doing this. We've evolved these principles from working at the Gemba, working with customers, and they're designed to bring the entire enterprise together, to work in a really collaborative way in order to create an entirely new value stream, which is a very unique approach to product development, which typically focuses on that product or that service in isolation. LPPD thinks about manufacturing, about last mile delivery, about upgrading while the customer has the product. It's a unique opportunity to design that whole experience. And I'm not going to go into every one of these principles in any detail. A number of my colleagues will be presenting throughout this event. Katrina Appel, John Dragos, Monica Rossi, Eric Ethington. There's a lot of people that will talk in a lot more detail about these, but there is one that I want to address while I'm here, while I have your ear, because I think it's so important to thinking about innovation. And that's this idea of understanding before you execute. That's this idea of making the front end of the product development process really potent, really productive by starting by zooming out and thinking very broadly about the art of the possible, looking at your customer, looking at the larger context, looking, of course, at competitors, looking at adjacent industries for ideas, actually building time into development to really think this through and develop a compelling vision for this specific product or service. And then identifying your knowledge gaps, right? What's the gap between our current state and where we need to get through, and creating a learning plan to close those gaps, an experimentation gap so that we can learn as we go. And one of the most powerful ways to do that, of course, that we owe to Al Ward, one of the biggest contributors to this way of thinking, to this discipline, is thinking in sets and experimenting to learn over time. And I find that this graphic can be really helpful to think about how this works, starting at the front end very broadly, exploring for new ideas, developing specific hypotheses, and then experimenting on those hypotheses, whether it's around manufacturing, whether it's around serviceability, whether it's around continuous updates, experimenting with these ideas in some rapid and effective way, deselecting, right? That often gets overlooked when we talk about set-based. Deselecting those ideas, combining other ideas, and working to converge, right, on the detailed version of what that product needs to be. It's a really powerful practice that still, after all these years, in my view, not enough organizations take full advantage of. And these ideas in LPPD have now gone far beyond the auto industry. We've worked with healthcare organizations like Michigan Medicine to develop clinical processes the same way you develop a new product. And it's been really powerful to engage everybody involved, not only the docs and the nurses and clinicians, but also software people, because so much of healthcare is software driven now. And following this same discipline, our friend Vibe in the Netherlands is applying, he and his team are applying these ideas to infrastructure in the Netherlands in one of the biggest infrastructure projects I think we've seen since World War II, with great success. It's being applied in defense, in consumer electronics. It's really gratifying to see how well these ideas can be adapted to fit in various industries. And so I guess my final thoughts on this is that disruption is a constant. It's here to stay. The picture that I have up on the screen is just a snapshot I took. It's about a 9-foot or 10-foot Yoda that we used to have on the wall of the executive offices at Rivian. Do or do not, there is no try. And for me, that speaks to really embracing the challenge of disruption, of innovation, of building it into the DNA of your company, to be willing to take on the big challenges. One that I'm very passionate about right now is creating sustainable value streams, not just products with sustainable use cases, but complete value streams from material selection through design, through manufacturing, through serviceability. This is a huge challenge that we're all facing right now. And LPPD gives you the tools, it gives you the principles and practices to be able to go out and take this on. And then finally, just a reminder, as Jim Womack always tells us, you have to engage your brain, right? You have to make this your own. And I love this quote by Bruce Lee: adapt what is useful, reject what is useless, and add what is specifically your own. You have to make these ideas your own and adapt them to fit your particular challenge. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Jim, for your fantastic contribution. I think most of us in the lean community are still in the early stages of understanding LPPD. And as you mentioned, this is going to be fundamental for this new era of innovation and disruption that we are seeing intensifying over the past few years. I was supposed to ask questions based on our participants, but I saw a lot of comments and everybody thanking you guys for your contribution over the years. So I would say most of the comments are thank you notes, networking things. If you haven't seen it, John Shook, it's online from Japan, taking some notes. So he's making some very interesting points. I would urge you to take a look at them. They make a very nice addition to the presenters. So we have actually John Shook around us making great contributions. And you all know John is fundamental, has been fundamental for us to be here today. So I will ask, because there are not many questions actually, I will ask myself, I will take the initiative to ask some questions from São Paulo, Brazil. And it's great that Jim is in Boston, Jim Morgan is in Traverse City, Northern Michigan, and you just heard in the introduction Oriol from Tenerife, Denise from Australia. Maybe Denise went to bed, maybe she's still around, and Matt from Boston. So I will ask a couple questions. One for you, Jim Morgan, to continue this discussion. Looking back in your experience, you deeply studied Toyota. You wrote a fantastic book about the Toyota product development system. And then you went to work for Ford, and then you tried to implement what you learned from Toyota. And then I think you and the team around the Ford management team, you were very successful. We all know there was a huge turnaround at Ford based on new products and new product development processes. And then you went to work for Rivian, a different environment, a different CEO, different company, different history, different products, different technologies. And then there's also on the background this question about the most valuable company in the automobile industry or in the mobility or maybe in the world, which is Tesla. What has been changing from Toyota, Ford, Tesla, Rivian in terms of the management practices, the management ideas in product development and also in the management of the whole company? If you could help us with that, please.
So a couple of comments. First of all, what I won't comment on, and that's valuations, because where the valuations are today, I don't know. It's beyond my understanding of markets, and so I'll just stay away from that one. I think the fundamental problems, challenges of developing new products and services are incredibly common across both industries and companies. What's different is the particular culture of that company, and fit is so important. I mentioned briefly with Rivian, we made a very conscious effort to say we don't want to be like anybody else. We don't want to just do what Toyota did or just do what Ford did. And at Ford, we certainly wouldn't and couldn't copy Toyota. Ford was a very different place. And so I think it's important to return to first principles. And that's why we've made these LPBD principles so seemingly simple and high level. But when you drill down, as you know, Jose, there's a ton there. But we wanted to make them sort of the first principles of doing great development that can then be utilized in a lot of different environments. And then the last thing that I'll say, the biggest difference personally that I experienced is the willingness to take incredible levels of risk. The appetite for risk at a place like Rivian or a place like Tesla, right? Especially in the early days of Tesla, when Straubel and those guys were still running it, they were willing to, risk everything in one sort of, product attempt. You could argue that's because they had less to lose than some of the incumbents like Toyota or Ford. But that risk tolerance, or that, it's not even a tolerance, it's almost a risk appetite that these disruptors have. If there's not a lot of risk, it seems they're not that interested. If we can't, change the game, if we can't make products that are substantially better, we're not that interested in it.
There is one question about this, Jim, is now a specific question. Can Ford and Toyota catch up, adapt to software first? It's a question from Barada Craig. I don't know where he's from, but thank you for the question.
So it's an excellent question, and it's a huge shift to this software first development, and really difficult for the very hardware focused companies, not only in terms of their development philosophy, but getting the talent that they need, getting the skills that they need, thinking about how to integrate hardware and software development in a seamless way in product development or process development is incredibly challenging. We have some thoughts about that, how to use milestones effectively and things like that. And again, I won't go there as more detailed than I think this session wants to get into. But I do think it's a major sort of mind shift. And I do think Toyota and Ford are getting there. I think Toyota's approach in particular, which Jim referenced, is really powerful. This idea of fully leveraging their lean capabilities to generate the capital that they're going to need to experiment in multiple areas, whether it's EVs or hydrogen. Again, Jim talked a lot about this already. Gives them an incredible advantage. So I'm not counting any of them out. And the big advantage that companies like Toyota and Ford have is they know how to make vehicles. So might be a secret to some people. Most people realize making trucks and cars is hard. It's really hard. It may be the most complex, sort of consumer product that any of us can drive that's made. And as we saw with Tesla, they struggled mightily, moved their first launch 3 years, right? Elon Musk talked about production hell. Their build quality still questionable. Rivian is going through their own version of production hell right now as they start to scale what I think is an incredible product that they've developed. So the fact that the Toyotas, the Volkswagens, the Fords already know how to make these complicated products gives them an advantage that I'm not sure everybody's looking at.
Well, thank you, Jim Morgan. As Jim mentioned, there's lots more in the event about LPPD, and there's lots of other resources. There's books, the videos, the articles, if you want to learn more about it. And the final question goes to Jim Womack. Jim, we're just kicking off an event And we're going to have sessions about healthcare, about digital, about construction, about many sectors, including the LPPD sessions. What can this mobility rupture or this mobility transition, what can they teach us to the rest of the lean community, to the rest of the sectors that are represented here? What are the lessons learned that we are learning from this transition? And what are the critical challenges for us to move on to the future?
Well, first, I think that there's not an industry that can avoid most of what's going on in the car industry. Turns out if you switch from a hardware to a software world, if you switch from a product to a service world, if you switch from something that is easily vertically integrated to something that really can't be vertically integrated, I think all industries are facing the same things. So therefore, the car thing, in its way, just because it was so mature and is now becoming so disrupted, that might be a little different from other industries that maybe had matured as much. The more mature you are, well, the harder it is to change to the next thing. But I think the challenges are pretty much the same everywhere. I think the hardest challenge that's out there is how do the people producing value stay in contact with the customer? That we're used to a world where there is some dominant player in any industry, and that could be the car company, or it could be the general contractor in construction, or it could be the big medical system in healthcare, that is going to sort of monopolize the contact with the customer. And that feels very comfortable to executives. They love that. And there's a tremendous amount of pushing and shoving to see who can get closest to the customer. And yet we're building a world where there are lots of ways to access everything, there isn't just one way. And we don't know what the best way is. I, as a customer, don't know what I think the best way is. Dan and I, when we were doing the Lean Solutions book, were often dreaming that somebody would just emerge to solve our mobility problem. We didn't have to think about cars anymore, or airplanes or anything else, that you just told whoever the provider was, here's what I need, and they would figure out how to get it for you. Hey, that's still a great thing, but it hasn't happened yet. And so we're still early days on trying to figure out what the relationship is between the provider and the consumer. We talked in that book a lot about provision streams compared to consumption streams, and noting that they never seem to quite interact the way they should. Well, that problem doesn't change. And indeed, that problem gets more complicated. So I would say for every industry, there will be a learning curve. There will be lots of experiments tried. As my daughter, the scientist, she's a real scientist, always reminds me, says, hey, Dad, you do realize that in science, most experiments fail. The hypothesis is generally rejected, not confirmed. And you guys over in industry could learn something from that fact, which is to say to do more experiments and to be not accepting of failure, saying it's okay, but just realizing that it's just part of the process. A lot of things fail, and big companies are just not used to that. So therefore, every experiment has to work, which all you get out of that is people rigging the results so that they appear to work, whereas in fact it didn't. It's a whole new world of trying to figure out how to engage with the customer as the provider, how to figure out how to engage with the provider when you're the customer. Every industry will have a different trajectory. We've got lots of work to do. Thank goodness we've got such great lean principles and methods that we know actually do work. We just have to figure out how to configure them and put it all together so that the big value puzzle comes into place.
Okay, thank you so much, the three speakers that we had today. In the Lean community, we have to thank you for your past, your current contribution, and we hope your future contribution. Thank you very much. I now ask Christopher to take the lead back again. Thank
Okay.
you.